Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 248. I'm so excited to bring you this episode. I'm talking to Lisa Van Gemert from the website The Gifted Guru. Lisa speaks widely all over the country about parenting gifted kids and teaching gifted kids. And she has so much information about giftedness and twice exceptionalities. Our conversation went in so many different directions, and I just love it. So you're going to have so many great takeaways, and I can't wait to hear them. Make sure you go over to the show notes for this episode, raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast, and leave me a voicemail or send me a message and let me know what your biggest takeaway was. Like, what was your gold nugget from this episode? What was the piece that made it worth listening? Before we begin, I just want to say thank you, as usual, to CTC Math. CTC Math is such a generous sponsor. They keep this podcast going and make it possible to bring you all of these guests and all of the great topics that we do. I'll talk a little bit more about them later in the episode, but if you haven't checked them out at ctcmath.com, please do so. You know, they don't just sponsor the podcast. I'm a customer, a paying customer, and I will happily pay for CTC Math to teach my kids math until the last one graduates. So check them out, ctcmath.com. All right, pop those earbuds in and let's get on with today's episode. I am so excited to have a guest I've wanted to get on for a really long time here with me today. This is going to be so fun. Lisa Van Gemert, welcome to the podcast.
So much for having me. I'm always excited to talk about perfectionism, and definitely with someone who's committed to the same kids I am. So I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, this is fun. Our paths kind of like virtually have crossed over the years. We did a lot of those way back when blog hops were like the thing to do, right? We were in a lot of those connected blog hops together. So I've been watching and reading your site, The Gifted Guru, for years and years and years and years. And it's just really fun to come full circle and like meet you in person, you know, virtually, but have you on and actually get to chat with you.
Thank you so much. Like, wow, that's a blast from the past. Like Hoagies would do those blog hops. Yes, absolutely. Oh, that's so fun. Thank you. That's an honor. I'm honored that you would take the time to read things on the website. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's all great stuff. And I love that, again, like you said, we talk about the same things. We're passionate about the same types of kids. And one of the things I love about this space anyway is that we have those same passions and same interests and same motivations to help families out, but we can do it in so many different ways. You know, you work with teachers and in classrooms and things like that. I'm working with homeschooling families, but there's so much crossover. And really it comes down to knowing your kids, getting them the help that they need and advocating for them, and then teaching them to advocate for themselves. So it's so synergistic to be able to, you know, touch base and have these great conversations. So this is going to be a fun one.
I'm really excited. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So why don't you take a minute for those of the listeners who have not come across your site or your books and things before? Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and just some of the things that you've done and are proud of, and then a little bit about your family, maybe?
Sure. So I'm Lisa Van Gemert. I'll tell you my family first because that's what's most important to me. I'm married to my husband, Steve. We have 3 grown sons and 4 granddaughters. And when my children were growing up, we had an educational blend. I homeschooled them for several years when we lived out of the country. And then I was a teacher and taught at their school. I've taught all of my own children as their teacher of record. And then I was a school administrator. And then I left that space to move into basically what I could consider a teaching assistant. Like, I'm trying to help teachers and parents who are trying to raise and nurture gifted children. And whether they are parents in a homeschool setting, whether they're parents who have children in a traditional school and they're trying to support them. And then also I do work with children as well. And I have published a number of books, 2 are appropriate for parents who aren't educators, one on perfectionism, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and then a couple that are in the educational space specifically for practitioners. And so I've been an expert consult to television shows that have gifted people on them, just making sure they get it right. And I do a lot of work for the Library of Congress as well. I wrote the Children's Guide to the National Book Festival. I'm kind of book obsessed, and I have a little free library in my yard. And that and my golden retriever are probably like that. I just named everything important in my life. Well, except God. But God, my family, my dog, and my books, pretty much that's everything to me.
I love that. Yeah, we definitely could be friends on a like seeing each other on a regular basis if we lived close. I think we'd have a lot to talk about. We for sure have a lot in common. So that's exciting. I love the little free library, and I love how eclectic the books and the resources that you've produced over the years are, because you touch on so many aspects of what it is to be gifted in this world. And, when a gifted individual is young, they need their parents and their support systems and their teachers, whether they're out of school or in school. So you've got resources for both those aspects. And then as they get older, all of the different things, with the consultations and things like that you do. So I love, love, love that. It's just such a rich resource. We'll make sure that we link to your site and all of your books in the show notes for this episode. I want to talk specifically about perfectionism. It's something that comes up all the time. And I remember, and I'm sure you've met him in different speaking events and places you've gone to. My mentor in college when I was going for my master's in gifted was Jim Delisle. I worked under him. Phenomenal, phenomenal guy. And it really got me interested in the social and the emotional needs of gifted children. And we've had conversations over the years, he and I, about twice exceptionalities and does it's like the chicken and the egg thing, does one come before the other, or how does that work? But it seems like at the core, so many of our gifted and or twice exceptional children have perfectionistic tendencies. So it comes up all the time. I'm sure it comes up all the time in your work. So let's talk about that first. Why are these kids so historically perfectionistic?
Well, there's an easy answer and then there's a more complicated answer, but the easy answer really covers about 90% of it, which is it's connected to a cognitive trait. So when you have, as gifted kids have, what they would call in the literature facility with abstraction. So facility in the sense of ease. So like in Spanish, fácil means easy. And that what gifted kids often has is this ease with abstraction, meaning that they can see so many different things at one time and put them all together and organize them and recognize the patterns. They're not intimidated by complexity. In fact, they often thrive on it. They get bored by things that aren't complex. They'd rather have a dot to dot with 1,400 dots than 35 dots, right? They love that complexity. And we see it represented in like shows like Sherlock, when you see his mind kind of moving. And so what happens is, because they have this ease with the abstract, when they see something, they instantly recognize how it could be done. And that creates a pressure. That creates a desire to do it better. Now, so in a lot of ways, that means that another common trait of gifted children, which is their hypercriticism, is connected to the perfectionism, right? So it's perfectionistic when it's directed at them, and it's hypercritical when it's directed at others. But what a lot of people don't realize is that, and I think why I keep writing, is that giftedness has not always been my friend. It hasn't always helped me to get along better with others or myself. And so in perfectionism, what we see is the manifestation of a cognitive trait in a mental health, emotional health way.
So interesting. And I see that too all the time. I see it in myself. We were talking a little bit about how similar our personalities are. And in my kids, because apples don't fall far, right? It's one of the reasons I think that we started homeschooling in the first place. One of the reasons my son started struggling so much in school, we pulled him out, for those who aren't familiar, in the middle of first grade. He just didn't fit. I mean, he just didn't fit. And everything was kind of crushing that love of learning and love of the complicated. And I remember every time we'd have trouble in our homeschool, it was usually related to something like him seeking more complex situations. He spent a whole year figuring out new and innovative ways to cheat on his math curriculum instead of just doing the work because it was more difficult to find ways around just solving the problem than actually solving the problem in itself. But that hypercriticism, I think that we as parents who see it don't make the connection often that it is rooted in that anxiety and that perfectionism and that understanding that things go wrong and there's a better way to do this, or I should be, doing this better. And we don't I don't know what the exact word is, but I know that, that we don't take all of it into account when we're helping our kids, right? Because the gifted mind is so unique. Typical behavioral therapy and other ways that a psychologist or a therapist would work with a kid, they don't get to that part. So how do we help them when they're so uber critical and it's rooted in that perfectionism? I don't like, what do we do as parents when we're faced with kids like that?
If we're going to talk just talking about that hypercriticism that's directed at others. So let me just define perfectionism in the way that I would define it, just so that we all are on the same page. I would define perfectionism as unreasonably high expectations combined with a lack of self-love.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, it's not just high expectations, because gifted children and adults are capable of high achievement. It's not just wanting to get A's. That's not perfectionistic. Most gifted kids are capable of getting grades they want when they get to college, right? And a lot of times people say, well, they never had to study when they were in school when they were younger, and so they just don't know how to study. And I'm like, then they're not really gifted, because they would figure out, you can Google how do you study, right? Like if you're that smart, right? But it's not high expectations alone. It's unreasonably high, where you don't have the physical, mental, or cognitive ability to achieve that goal, and you have no mercy on yourself. Like you have a take no prisoners attitude, right? And when you combine those two things together is where I say perfectionism lives. Now, not everyone in the field would agree with me, but that is how I define it. So when we're moving forward talking about perfectionism, that's what I mean. When you have an unreasonably high expectation and you have no mercy on yourself when you don't achieve that unreasonable expectation. Mm-hmm. So for the critical side, that unreasonably high expectation sometimes goes to not just other people, but other situations around them. They see something and they see how it could be done better. And there's this cognitive disconnect because they want to do everything better. Like if they see that there's an optimal way to do something, they want to do it, and they get very excited. They learn a better way to do it. And they don't understand that not everybody shares that excitement. Not everybody is happy to be told there's a better way to do what you're doing, and I'm here to share it with you. Especially if that person is 6 and the person with whom they want to share it is 46, right? Like we also have some societal norms of power distance. And so one of the things I would say, you said, how do we address it? And I think there are a couple of things. First of all, obviously my book is full of strategies, but I'm going to share a few of the ones I think work the best. And the first one I'm going to share is not actually in the book. So this strategy is specifically about criticism. I think it is useful once a child can write, which for gifted children, unless they have a language processing disorder or some kind of issue, is fairly young, right? By 7, they can do this typically, unless they're working with something else. But let them have a notebook of, and I think gifted kids are one of the other characteristics of gifted learners is that they are attuned to the aesthetic nature of things. They like pretty things. Yeah. They like things that look good. That's why you mentioned that your son does video editing and other things, and that's a perfect field because they know when something looks good. And they sometimes will get formal training in it, but the formal training almost always just either confirms what they already intuitively guessed or intuited, or they are learning like the actual technical way to accomplish what they want, right? They're learning how to make it look the way that they know it should look. But I think that having a notebook, and I think a nice notebook, like one of the, like a leather cover, something nice that they can keep track of, a place to put down all of the things that they know how to do better. Like if I were doing this, this is what I would do. They've got to have an outlet. And it can't just be you. It cannot just be the parent. because then you take on that burden. Because probably if you have a gifted child, the the odds are ever in your favor that you also are gifted, right?
Right.
And I mean, it's you know how it is. So and not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time. And so they point it out to you, and now you can't not notice. And that's a burden as well, right? And so we want to give them an outlet. So whether it's a stack of post-it notes where they can jot notes down, whether it's a physical notebook, whether they have an app on their phone where, when I'm the king of the world or when I'm the queen of the world, this is how it will be done. And I'm saying this out loud, and I'm realizing I need to take this advice now for myself, even as an adult, because it does not go away. And it's an important question that you ask about how do you handle this? Because when they finish their schooling, their formal schooling, and they move into their future life, whether they are being a homemaker or whether they are a nuclear physicist, it doesn't matter. They don't get a get out of gifted free card.
Yes.
They're going to be struggling with these issues forever. And so you're not just trying to teach them how to manage this hypercriticism as a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old, but as a 35-year-old who has a boss who is not doing things the way that they should be done, and any idiot could see that, right? They need to have outlets already in place, and they need to practice that in your home.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a phenomenal point that I think that we forget that we're not raising kids and then they're going to be done, miraculously at 18, they're going to be this perfect adult or whatever. They are who they are. And so our job as parents isn't just to fix anything. And in fact, I think that we get stuck in that. How do we fix our kids? How do we help them have like the perfect adulthood? It's not possible. And so our job isn't to fix them, it's to help them be the best versions of themselves as they grow and learn to advocate for themselves or adapt to whatever it is. My oldest has always hated and struggled with the stamina of writing. And while
Mhm.
he's got ideas coming out of his ears, getting them on paper was a physical chore. And so we started early on, and again, he's 21. So this was early talk to text. That was, you had to actually have software for talk to text, right? Do you remember Dragon Dictation?
Oh,
Yeah. So we taught him to dictate everything. At 21, he still dictates his texts and his emails, and then he goes back and fixes them. So our job isn't to force that child, that person who struggles with writing, to handwrite everything. It's to help them find something that they can do, because the writing is getting those thoughts on wherever it needs to be so that it's readable and understandable and can communicate ideas. And so finding adaptations for it. So if it is writing them down or having an outlet, we're teaching them to be kind to themselves as they grow, to find the modifications that they need as adults that won't interfere with their daily life, but will actually enhance it. And it's not just getting them to the finish line of this magical number 18 and being done. So I just worked on a book project. It'll be out later this year, but some of the research that I was focused on was that like early psychology versus some of the more positive psychology is really the genre, right, for lack of a better term. But the difference between pathologizing everything and meeting people where they are and helping them, be the better version of themselves, or find the good and build on strengths. And it was the particular project is very heavily rooted in strength-based learning. And so we don't want to fall into necessarily the trap of this gifted kid thinks so differently that we want to change them, but we want to help them be able to accommodate whatever they need, or acclimate. And acclimate's not the right word, but be able to find what's that.
I mean, yeah, it kind of is, right? Like you think about it's not negative. I do think there's a danger
Mm.
in moving too far into the space of no matter how different you are from the rest of the world, it's totally fine and everybody should adapt
Yes.
to meet your needs, because that's just not practical in a long range situation. But also there are things about us, like I have things about me that are who I am and should be adjusted.
Yes.
I'm impatient. It's not nice. I can be hypercritical. If I express that to people in word or deed, or even in subtle, like a story I'm telling myself, it also can negatively impact not only myself, but those around me. So I wouldn't say that that we don't want people to acclimate, because we know that like animal adaptation to their environment is what allows flora and fauna to survive and thrive.
Right.
And so we have to acclimate unless we can control. And so one of the things that is good is that when kids are appropriately educated for them, then when they become adults, they're better able to self-select. And then things like their extreme perfectionism, I may catch some flack for this, but I would say almost every profoundly gifted child that I have worked with has looked, I'm not saying they are, but they have looked a little Aspie. Now, Asperger is no longer an available condition, I know that, but they look it to others.
Yes.
And would I want to change that in them? No, no. But do I need to let them know a little what in the literature they would call code switching?
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I code switch in my life, and we all do, right? So I think that I don't think you're wrong.
It's so hard, right? Because you're absolutely exactly where I'm trying to communicate, right? That I think that there is a degree of fitting in that everybody needs to do in this world to be able to cohabitate, with others. I Even if you break it down to as simple as an example as rule following or law following, I can't run a stop sign because I'm late for something, that just because I want to be there on time. No, I still have to follow the law for safety reasons or whatever. And so if I present, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and I've said that too, they're, maybe Asperger's like, but I know that's not a diagnosis anymore. You say that, but it really is, it's a descriptor of a lot of the people, children and adults I've worked with over the years. And there is a level of being able to communicate with others to get their points across that they need to do in order, A, to get their needs met, B, to get a job or turn in a paper and have it understood, or wherever they end up going. My son sometimes struggles to know what to say to people in a given situation, and a lot of that is rooted in his opinion of what should be taking place because he knows better than you, but he can't go into a situation where nobody knows him or has a background with him and present that way, because A, he'd never be a part of that community that he's trying to get into. B, he'd never get another job. Part of networking is being able to fit in with the groups around you so that you can then have some give and take, right? Which is so hard for our perfectionists to do, especially when they know better than you, right? Like you made the example earlier of the 6-year-old saying something to a 46-year-old, and I remember so vividly being pulled aside at a class we had done, the natural history museum classes, and I was pulled aside and asked not to sign my son back up until he could listen to the adults who were presenting without correcting everything that was coming out of their mouths, because while he was right, they were speaking to the majority of the 8-year-olds in the classroom, and not, who were there for a field trip just to understand the basics. And so they would have been willing to talk to him had he listened and then pulled them aside afterwards to expand on the knowledge or have a debate over what was said and how it was said and why it was said that way. And so we do have to help them navigate those situations.
We absolutely do. And their perfectionism, when it is directed at themselves, can lead to very negative consequences, right? Extreme perfectionism can lead to eating disorders. It can lead to cutting it. Other thing, it can lead to extreme anxiety. Like it can lead to a lot of other things. In fact, perfectionism is in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is in the diagnostic criteria for obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And so perfectionism can become pathological in a very real way that's dangerous to people. It is also dangerous to our relationship with others. It's dangerous to our relationship with our family. So it's one of the things that definitely needs to be addressed in a way that the child understands it's not that you're wrong. It's that cliche, right? There's a time and a place for everything. But also the idea that even though you know a lot, you don't know everything. And you don't always know all sides of it, right? So, like in your case, your son was seeing it from his perspective, but was really too young to, without help from an adult, put himself into the position and be able to say, oh, well, they probably know this too, but who are they talking to? Right. And so that is multiple perspectives of in the depth of complexity thinking model is the ability to put yourself in another person's perspective and another person's place. And that is one of, I would say, in perfectionism, that is one of the most important thinking strategies to teach a child is the ability to put yourself in the position of both animate and inanimate people and objects. So for instance, if I am a house and people are living in me, do I really want to look like a museum of the American family? Or does the house want there to be a book left on the coffee tables, just as a reminder that people enjoy reading in my room? Does the house want to see like these things? And so if kids can learn to put themselves in the positions of both animate and inanimate people and objects, then they are less likely to dive off the deep end with this kind of criticism. And that's probably what you ended up having to talk to your son about, right? Is exactly what you're doing, is shifting his perspective. And as we practice and practice, then we teach them to do it in the moment, which is, in fact, like a form of mindfulness. A form of mindfulness is and often when people talk about mindfulness, and I'm bifurcating it from like a meditative practice that would be associated with like a religion. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea of being fully present in the moment. A lot of people leave out the next part of what the mindfulness definition is, which is to be fully present in the moment without judgment. That's the goal of mindfulness. But part of the goal of mindfulness is also to see how does this present moment manifest to the others around me? And is my vision of this, is my reality the whole reality? And another piece that's important for kids is to understand that everybody deserves their own struggle. No kid, if they don't know something, no gifted kid wants somebody standing there going, oh, well, you just need to do this. Oh, you just need to do this. They want to figure it out themselves. And a lot of our gifted kids can, from a very early age, understand that everybody wants that. Everybody wants to be able to figure out themselves. So we can teach them, and I think this is one of the core strategies, is that we teach them maybe 4 or 5 questions to ask that they could use in a moment. Like one of the things would be, are you going to take questions at the end, or would you prefer questions during the presentation? Right? We want to teach our kids to ask that question very early on. We want to teach kids to ask the questions like, would you like an idea of what I might try if I had to deal with what you're doing? Like if I had to do what you're doing, would you like an idea of what I would try? Or I've noticed something that I think you may not yet have noticed that will make what you're doing even better than it already is. Would you like to hear my idea? Rather than assuming, and this is the root of that hypercriticism, is assuming everybody wants your feedback in that moment all the time. So what we have to look at is those are 3 different things. And sometimes when the kid shares this criticism or feedback and it's unwelcomed, they feel rejected. They feel that their ideas were rejected rather than considering, well, it may just not have been the right time, right? Or it may not have been to the right person. And so we want to teach kids to ask those questions so that then they recognize, oh, it's not that they don't want my ideas, it's just not a good time right now.
Hey there. Okay, so you've heard me talk about CTC math for months and months, and it is because we just love it here. It has made my homeschooling easier, especially when it comes to math. I'm not a mathy person, and I never have been, but I love CTC because it makes it easy for me. And then when my kids struggle with a certain concept or they're not getting something quickly enough, I can watch the lesson too, and then I can get it. So it's teaching me, really, truly, almost as much as it's teaching the kids, because if I don't get something, I can watch the tutorials. And that exact experience happened to a longtime follower, Sandy, who wrote in, "We started using CTC Math following your recommendation, Colleen. One of my sons is so dedicated. Then, after watching over his shoulder, my other son started using it too. They both do an hour each weekday, their choice." Now, side note here, CTC Math only takes about 7 to 10 minutes per lesson. My kids tend to do 1 to 2, sometimes very occasionally 3 lessons a day. So we're talking like anywhere between 15 and 40 minutes of math a day, max. But Sandy's kids are so into it that they are doing an hour a day, their choice. Okay, so Sandy says, "I even enjoy it myself. I do the lessons with them, which is a handy brush up, and will occasionally do some of the algebra lessons ahead of time. Math was not my strong suit in school, but now I love it, and I wish the program had been available in the 80s. Too many people think they're terrible at math, but I truly believe we all need a method of learning that suits us. CTC Math seems to work for all 3 of us." I asked my 13-year-old son, who's been using the program for about 18 months, what he thinks of it, and in his own words, he said he enjoys reaching mastery in a particular subject because "I know that if I get a question wrong," he says, "I'll have to redo all the questions until I reach mastery. That means I will have a full grasp of the subject, and that's pretty satisfying." 13-year-old. Come on, like you can't beat that. Okay, FYI, Sandy says, I have the pass rate set to 90%. So parents, you can set the rate you want your kids to meet. My settings, depending on the kid, are set between 85 and 95%. I've got one kid who is a full year ahead in math, and he's really good at math, and his is set to 95%. I've got another one who's a little iffy at math, and that kiddo's level is set to 85%. So you get to do what you want to do in it, and that's amazing. Okay. She goes on to say, and finishes off this quote by saying, "CTC Math is unlike any platform that's out there, and I just love it. I appreciate you, Colleen. You have a special place in my heart for everything you put into your work, and I appreciate you and all the things you share." Seriously, I'm going to keep sharing resources like CTC Math because they work. They make homeschooling easier, and they allow us to do the things that we want to do with our kids, and basically take off of our plates the things we have to do with our kids. Our kids need math. Let CTC do it. Check them out at ctcmath.com. Let them know I sent you. And then if you've got a story to share, I'd love to hear it. All right, let's get back to today's episode. Yeah, that's a great perspective shift. I think that that's so important. Definitely, parents, if you're listening, I'll share links, but make sure that you check out Lisa's book on perfectionism, because there's so many other strategies in there too that go along with this. But that idea of perspective shifting, the 2 that you shared, one, putting themselves in the position of others, both animate and inanimate, and then being able to ask questions so they can set themselves up for success in a given situation, are both very valuable and tangible things we could be doing early on. I think one of the best strategies that parents can do is normalize those kinds of conversations within their home, right? Especially as we are, as homeschooling parents, gifted with all this extra time with our kids, that can easily be integrated into like a lunchtime conversation or whatever. What would you do? Have you ever seen, I think it's, I'm looking at it from across the room, but I can't make out the author. Maybe Warren. The book series, If I Were a Road, If I Were, it's okay. So they're divergent thinking books. I've done them with students throughout the years, including in my own community. But the book, there's like If I Were a Table, If I Were a Road. There's 1 or 2 others. Very simplistic in graphic design, we'll just say illustration. Not something most people would pick up off the shelf, but the book is all about. The books are all about divergent and critical and creative thinking, but thinking in different perspectives. If I Were a Road is about, you read through this kind of story. Really, it's almost like a poem about if I were this type of road, I would be like this, or if I were this type of road, I would be like this. But then the prompts at the end, the exercises that you do with kids are thinking about, well, who are you? If you were a road, what kind of road would you be? Or if you were in this situation and you were, if you were, say, a country road and animals were crossing or somebody was speeding through it, what kinds of things would you be thinking? And you can do this for fun with the kids, right? In a natural setting, which then normalizes the thinking about others and thinking from others' perspectives, and then asking questions to set yourself up for success off the bat.
Agreed. I have one more strategy, but I also want to share one more thought
Yeah.
on that. One other thing that parents can do that I think we don't do enough of is solicit their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is we feel sometimes inundated by their opinions, right? We feel overwhelmed by their opinions. Why would we want to solicit them? But I think that as we do solicit them and we show that we take their ideas more seriously, they think more carefully about their ideas. Like, well, the recipe says I should use 3 to 4 cups of flour. I've put 3 in. Do you think I should add a fourth? Right, here's my goal, right? Or we're doing this. What do you think? And showing them that you value and are actively soliciting their opinion means that they sometimes gifted kids just have a need to be constantly communicating. Their communication needs are astronomical, like, and it can be overwhelming. Like a lot of parents of typical learners, that child's going to grow out of that why when they're 3 or 4 years old. And the parents of the gifted kids are like looking at the calendar going, man, this kid is 17. Like, when is it, when is this stopping? But if we do solicit their opinion, it can help them learn to be more careful about their opinions, and it lets them see that sometimes what they suggest does not work optimally, and it can be a little, not necessarily humbling, although I think we all need to be humbled at some point, but that is helpful. The most effective strategy I think that I write about in the book vis-a-vis perfectionism that people find helpful, that I think can go along with this idea, is the 1 to 5 strategy. And it is where this is where you give everything you're doing, well, not necessarily everything, but you're giving a thing that you're doing a score on a scale of 1 to 5 based on how important it is. So a 5 is like something life-threatening, right? You're a surgeon doing brain surgery, right? That's a 5. 1 is it just needs to get done, but it doesn't really matter, right? It's not, there's nothing really big at stake. It needs to be done, but not that important. And then, and then the rest of the scale, 2 through 4, is moving from not really that important to must be done perfectly. The problem is that most things are about a 3, but most perfectionistic kids act like everything is a 5, and they want to die on every hill. So one of the exercises that can be very helpful to them is both from let's talk first about this hypercriticism that we've talked about fairly extensively today, which is that they can be sitting in an environment where they notice that something's wrong, and they can think to themselves, this is really bothering me that this is wrong. But on a scale of 1 to 5, how critical is it that this person know this? Like, if I don't share this information with them, is somebody going to be hurt? Is something going to break? Will there be a negative consequence to it if I don't share it right now? And then that's a good question for them to ask, because because then it leads to, can it wait? And if I ask it right now, will I do more harm than good? Right. And so, because you mentioned earlier that one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to raise kids, they have all these great ideas. We need to raise them to be able to persuade others to their ideas. And we can't do that if they think we're jerks. We can't persuade people who don't like us. The best ideas coming from the wrong source fall on deaf ears.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying not to do that. Okay, so let's look at the 1 through 5 strategy for the perfectionistic child directed at him or herself. One of the things that I encourage parents to do is sit down with kids and make a list of the common things that the kid does every day. Maybe they're looking at schoolwork, and you may need to break that down, because kids are often different in the way that they approach science versus language arts versus math or whatever, right?
Right.
But write down, how do they approach it? How do they approach like practice? How do they approach reading, not reading for pleasure, but reading for analysis? How do they approach cleaning their room? How do they approach doing their chores? How do they approach these different things? And give them a scale of 1 to 5. And then ask them next, how do most other people feel about it? And then say like, oh, well, I act like it's a 5. Most people think it's a 3. And then ask them, would it benefit you to shift one step closer to the way other people see it? And it gives parents a vocabulary, because if a kid is fixated on something, obsessed with something, you can easily see that the parent can say, Jonathan, I feel it looks to me like you're treating this like a 5. Jonathan is actually the name of my middle son, so I feel like I can use my own kids' names with that. But I can say, Jonathan, it looks like you're treating this like a 5, and I would have thought it was more like a 2. Do you think that you might have a better time with this if you shifted one back? But sometimes kids will go the opposite way. Sometimes they'll treat things like a 1 that should be a 5. And then when it doesn't work, their perfectionism rears its head and manifests as extreme frustration.
Yeah. Okay. So I love the idea of giving parents a common vocabulary to work on with their kids, right? Because that's going to help them have those conversations, again, further normalizing who their kids are. I think that that's so important for us to do when we're raising any kind of neurodivergent child. We need to help them see who they are and how they are wired to be, right? While then having a common vocabulary so we can set them up for success. Great strategy. I love the 1 to 5 and the others that you shared. So when parents are working with their kids, when they're teaching them and parenting them and adding all those layers, right? I think that just really quickly before we go, we definitely are not going to have time to dive into this completely. This is a whole nother episode, but parents who are homeschooling, gifted, twice exceptional, any kind of neurodivergent child have additional layers to what they're doing anyway, right? A homeschooling parent has the teaching and the parenting and all of the things. And then when you layer in these neurodivergencies, you can open yourself up to some struggles that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise, which is why seeing an OT or consulting or coaching with others who have that background is such a great thing to keep in your back pocket. Like, I may need at some point to just touch base with someone who's got more knowledge in this area than me, or read a book that's specifically about something that I'm seeing. But one tangible thing we can all do is start finding ways to have that language in our arsenal of tools so that we can talk to our kids early on around the table and start normalizing those things like asking questions, evaluating, that self-evaluation, that reflecting on how I handled or didn't handle a situation, or what could I have done differently, or how could I have perceived it differently, or mom thinks it's like this, I think it's like this. Maybe if I met in the middle, I'd be more along the lines of what the other people outside of us are thinking. And it helps us as parents too, because like we've talked about in this episode, apples and trees. And, there's going to be some kind of giftedness in one or both parents if you're dealing with this in your children, because you just aren't, you're not missing that in your family, right? That's in there somewhere. And so you can start talking about yourself. I mean, how many times, Lisa, have you talked to parents over the years who have discovered something about themselves in discovering about their kids, right? That's pretty common in our field.
Oh, it's 100% of the time. It's 100% of the time. And a lot of times, parents didn't even realize that the experience that they are having was as a result of giftedness, right? They didn't realize that that was a gift with purchase.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that term. That's amazing. I think that there are so many other things that we can talk about, and we could probably have a follow-up episode on other topics with regards to this, because there are so many things that go along with raising and teaching and advocating for and preparing gifted kids for the future. But this, in a nutshell, this perfectionism with 3 strategies that you can take away are absolutely a wonderful, wonderful start. So before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you first a question. I'm going to put you on the spot, and then I'm going to ask you to tell parents where they can find you. But putting you on the spot, if there was one more thing based on the things that we've talked about today, one more thing that maybe we didn't get to, or that you think is really important to leave parents with, what would that be? They're homeschooling and teaching and living with these perfectionistic beings who are both critical with others and critical with themselves. What would be that like one piece you want to leave them with?
I think that this is such a difficult question
I know. I'm
because
sorry.
it's personal for everyone, right? It's, what everybody needs to hear is different. But what I will say is that I really hope that homeschooling parents would give themselves so much grace. I talked before about how I would define perfectionism as unreasonably high expectations combined with a lack of self-love. And I think that I see that a lot in my homeschooling friends, where there's so many great resources, there's so much great curriculum, there's so many things that you can do. And then because it's available, they sometimes feel guilty if they're not doing it all. And I think sometimes we worry we're going to break our kid, right? Like I have this special child. I know that they're different. I know that they're capable of so much. Am I really doing like never feeling like you're quite enough for what they need? Like and I would just say if I could go back and talk to myself as a homeschooling mom, I would have said, you're treating every day like a 5 and it's really a 3. The moments that we don't even think of are, I can remember of an entire year 1 year of homeschooling. The next year I asked one of my kids, like, what do you remember most that we learned last year? And what they remembered most was on the day of the first snowfall that I canceled our homeschool, which I have all sons. And so I named our homeschool Plumfield after the Joe's Boys
Hmm.
School. And I I canceled Plumfield School, called a snow day, and I took all the boys sledding. And then when we came home, they I made hot chocolate and I had made cookies the night before. So we sat together and we had hot chocolate and I talked about snow and I had this book that had snowflake patterns and we were cutting out snowflake patterns and talking about we ended up in this big thing about snowflakes. And I remember my youngest son at that time was like 3 years old, 4 years old. And I remember him, he had a speech impediment and him saying, hot chocolate, no way. And it was just so funny how he said hot chocolate. And I still remember it. But that was the day they remember. Like, of all the things we learned, of all the things we did, of all the places we went, it was that day that they remembered. And so give yourself some grace and know that you, just the fact that you are willing to make this sacrifice is enough. Your children will have no doubt of your love and dedication for them. So give yourself some grace and know that those shining moments will, those, even if it's one in a whole year, will cover a multitude of things that you wish you could have done differently. But you are what your child needs, and you have been led to homeschooling for a reason. And as long as you trust yourself and follow advice from those whom you trust, and as long as your expectations of yourself and your children are reasonable, your children will be fine. And I say this having worked with probably 30,000 children who are like the top gifted. So I know this to be true, and I hope that you will accept this from me.
That is amazing and perfect. And I think that it's so important to remember that our kids need us. That's what they need at the bottom of it all. And just even the anecdote that you shared, that's what they remember. They remember the connection. They remember the time we spent. And so it's when all else fails, resort back to connecting with your kids and everything will turn out because you are exactly who they need and who you're meant to be. I absolutely love that. So thank you. Before we go, can you take a minute to let everybody know where to find you, how to reach out if they, want to work with you or have more questions, and where to find your books so that they can, we'll link to everything, but just for those who are, have earbuds in and are taking a walk and getting away from their kids so they can hear it and remember it.
Sure, thank you. So I have the website giftedguru.com. giftedguru.com. I said it too quickly. I also, if you are homeschooling and you work with language arts as well, there's a website I do called Vocabulary Luau, where I teach a lot of strategies for teaching vocabulary that might be useful to you. My books are available, like they always say, anywhere books are sold. You can get them on Amazon, Apple Pay, like Apple Books, Google Books, all of that, Barnes and Noble. The thing I would suggest for parents is Perfectionism or Living Gifted is the way to start.
I really appreciate you spending so much time with me today. I'm just so grateful that you were able to share and that you were willing to come on and take so much of your time. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a true pleasure. The conversation went directions I didn't expect and brought back some truly wonderful memories. It makes me want to go back and read through my journal about those precious times.
I appreciate that. And I love when the conversation kind of takes on a life of its own. So yeah, it was great. It was great for me too. And so fun to talk to somebody who, is in that same world and has a similar background to me. So I appreciate it. For those who are listening, if you didn't get a chance to write down or jot down Lisa's contact information, her website, and her books, we will have links to everything we talked about here in the show notes for this episode. You can check them out at raisinglifelonglearn.com/podcast. And we'll be back same time, same place next week with another episode on various topics to help you in your homeschooling adventures with creative, outside the box, gifted, twice exceptional children. And a special thank you to our sponsor for this episode, CTC Math. We appreciate them so much. They are so supportive and have a great program that's very versatile for all sorts of different learners. So, all right, I will see you back here next week, same time, same place. Have a great week. Enjoy your kids. Connect with them. Enjoy the conversations you can have. And I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.